I can't believe that it's finally time to say it, but this is my review of the overall series finale of Steven Universe, including Steven Universe and Steven Universe Future. As crazy it is to say it, there was a part of me that thought this day would never come, and not just because I expected Cartoon Network to eventually put the show on hiatus for so long that I died before it came back. I really just didn't think that this show was going to go away, because I didn't let myself think about the fact that this show was eventually going to go away. And now that it's gone, and we keep hearing one thing after another, which seems to be shooting down any possibility of a continuation in any other form, official continuation anyway, I don't know how to feel. I think the weirdest part is that I kind of feel nothing. And that's not to say that I don't feel happy that the show ended on a positive note. That's not to say that I don't feel sad that it's over. That's not the kind of nothing I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of nothing that comes from numbness, I guess, is the best way to put it. I'm still numb over this. It doesn't feel real yet. And that's probably because we've gotten so many hiatuses. It's probably going to take a while without the show being on the air again before it really sinks in for me that it's not coming back this time. And it doesn't help that, and I get it, I get that the crew, at least to some degree, wanted the show to end on an ambiguous note, but it doesn't help that Steven Universe Future doesn't feel like it was finished. And it really hurts me to say that, because overall I liked the show. Even the episodes that were hardest to watch, I liked them. Now, a big reason for that is that I love these characters so much. I've said that before. But I've still liked the episodes. I still liked Steven Universe Future overall. I still think it was a good show. But I don't know that it was a good Steven Universe show, because it did feel incomplete. I don't even feel like I need to do a summation of these episodes. Anyone who's watching this review has seen them. So I think I'm just going to jump off of that, off of the fact that the episodes didn't feel like they actually completed the show, and work from there in terms of my analysis. First, though, I want to make it absolutely clear that there was some amazing stuff in these episodes. I loved a lot of the stuff in here. The stuff that I didn't like was proportionately very, very small compared to everything that I just adored about these final 3 episodes. I want you to remember that as I go into the things that I didn't like. In fact, let's talk about a few of my favorite things about the episode first. Alright? First of all, I loved the final episode. I thought it was pretty much perfect. It was, as I predicted, very much just an epilogue episode. There was even a bit of another time skip at the beginning of it. We know at the very least we've jumped ahead several months, though I think it's implied based on the fact that Steven leaves home at the end that it had to have been over a year, since I would imagine he's probably 18 at this point. It's confirmed that Steven has been getting therapy, thank God, and even though we don't see any of it, he's doing really well. He's even shown exercising. There's a fantastic callback to the scene where he and Garnet exercise together, where he's shown exercising, which is a mental health thing, and he seems to be doing really well, so I have full confidence that his therapist is of genuine help to him. I don't feel like we need to see any of his therapy sessions in order to know that. And his interactions with all of the other characters feel so much healthier than they have in such a long time. They're touching. He gives gifts to all of the gems, and in case you haven't watched the episodes yet and are watching this for some reason, I'm definitely not going to spoil that, because it's so good, and is such a trip down memory lane. Every single gift is a trip down memory lane. And there's stuff in the background of the episode as Steven is leaving town that implies that he didn't just give gifts to the other gems. In fact, I even think he mentions that he has other gifts to give to other people now that I think about it. Because we see Onion with the cheeseburger backpack. He gave Onion his cheeseburger backpack. How cute is that? It's so good. It feels exactly how I expected this show to end. And Everything's Fine was very, very good. Like, especially the scene where everybody confronts Steven, and you can tell the Crystal Gems are trying so hard to be supportive of him, since that was one of the lessons that they learned over the course of this season, but also show their concern for him. But at the same time, they're trying to hide their concern for him because they're trying to trust that he knows what he wants. It's so painful to watch because I just want to smack them in their light-based, multicolored faces and be like, no, this is not the time to support him. You need to drag him off to therapy. He needs therapy. It was very painful to watch, but at the same time, they're so close. They're so close to finally connecting with him. They're so close. So, like, you're tense through the whole scene, waiting for that moment to come, knowing that it's not going to come, because Wormy Boy still hasn't happened yet. So now at this point, Wormy Boy's got to be Steven, which means they aren't going to reconnect with him yet. And the voice acting here and the animation, it was so good. The facial features, the expressions on the characters. I can't think of an example of anything that is better acted and better animated in the entire course of the show. Stuff that's on par, right? But nothing better. This is among the best scenes in the entire show. It's exquisite. And the stuff leading up to it, even though seeing Steven break down like we do at the start of the episode and then throughout most of the rest of it is hard, it's still pretty funny to watch, which is a nice bit of levity. And also, I'm pretty sure Bismuth is planning to propose to Pearl because she's making wedding armor and her model is a different Pearl. Like, somebody else pointed this out on Tumblr. I'm lifting this directly from their post, but I think, like, they just implied it. They did not say that they thought that was what Bismuth was planning, but I think that I agree with their implication there. I think that is something that the crew wanted us to understand was going to happen. And that's very, very cool. So that's 2 out of 3 of the episodes. That's the lead up to the climax, and then the epilogue. And I think they're both brilliant. So obviously I thought there was a problem with the climax of this episode. And I'll talk more about what I thought was wrong with the season overall in just a minute. It actually hurts me to say that. It actually hurts me to say what I think was wrong with the series overall. And that's Future. We're talking about Future specifically in this context at this point. But to get it out of the way right now, I do think that this was a flawed climax. I tweeted as the climax was happening, as it was coming to an end, something along the lines of, I expected it to be more, or else I'm just really sad that it's over. And I wasn't sure at the time which one it was yet. And I've taken the last couple of days to think on this, specifically this. And I honestly feel like there was something missing from this climax. And I don't know specifically what it is. I think it's Jasper. I think Jasper should have been following Steven around throughout Everything's Fine, building a bit of a rapport with him, coming to the understanding kind of in the background through her facial expressions, going on a face journey, realizing that even though she is now bound to Steven as far as she's concerned, that she recognizes that Steven is not being himself, and feeling obligated to protect him, even from himself. She's wrestling with how to fix this without overstepping her bounds as one of his loyal followers. And then I think that she should have had something to say in I Am My Monster. Because, like, I love that it's Connie and Garnet, but mostly Connie, let's not kid ourselves. Connie was the MVP of this entire series. I love that it was Connie who gets through to him. I loved her line about wanting to help him despite knowing that she doesn't have his powers. In fact, I like every line she got in the entire episode, but I don't entirely buy that Steven would have come around from the actions of just Connie and Greg and the gems and the diamonds. Because as far as he's concerned, the diamonds have already failed to help him, and he now has in the forefront of his mind just how traumatized he was by them, right? And he's been so disillusioned with Greg and the gems, and he's been avoiding burdening Connie with any of this for so long. I would expect him to reject all of them as they tried to get through to him. But somebody like Jasper, I could see her saying something about how even she knows that this isn't him, saying it in her own brash, Jasper-y kind of way. I could see that putting a chink in his armor through which the others could get through, and the rest of the scene could go exactly as it was in the episode. I also would have loved to have seen Steven actually rampage a little ways into town, have the gems still manage to mitigate much of the damage. Like, I don't want to see anybody get hurt or anything, but how cool would it have been if he had actually rampaged partway into town and the townspeople had asked what's going on and somebody had mentioned offhand, that's Steven. And then for the climax, when everybody is showing their support for him, the townspeople gather around and yell out their support too. Like, how great would that have been? But it doesn't happen. And like, I get Garnet growing so big that she's at the right scale to hug him, and then effectively repeating the scene where he hugged the shrunken down centipedal and calmed her down so that she could be bubbled again until they could help her further. That was a great callback. It was fantastic. It showed that Garnet had internalized who Steven is so completely that she could be that person for him. It was great. And I am not saying that I didn't like that happened. I'm just saying I wanted a version of the episode where something like that happened, and Connie's speeches still happened, and all of the other characters' acknowledgement of how much they've wronged Steven happened, and more still happened. I feel like there was room for more, and I feel like the scene deserved more. I feel like they got through to Steven too easily. And there are going to be people who argue that that's not true, and you can argue that. This is very much a subjective, opinionated thing. I just feel like it happened too easily. And I know some people are going to take this back to when White Diamond came around, because I have said that I didn't think that happened too quickly, and I'm saying that I think this did. The difference is that White Diamond had that moment where something shook her so deep to her core that she was receptive to coming around. I don't feel like Steven had anything like that happen to him. That's why I'm proposing this Jasper scene. I feel like that Jasper scene would have been something akin to that. Maybe I'm just salty that the show has been promising development for Jasper for years now, and we just never got it. Even though showing that little bit of growth for Jasper where she rises above her perceived station to help someone who she cares about, even in such a superficial way as thinking that she should be devoted to him, that would have been a major development for her character. And yes, we do get a little bit of development for her there at the very end as Steven's leaving. She wants to go with him and he turns her down, and you can see she's disappointed, but then she heads back into the school, and it's implied that she's learning to be a better person from Little Homeschool. But I don't feel like that's enough. Jasper's always been such an interesting character. I don't feel like we got enough of her. And again, I want to point out, there was a lot in I Am My Monster that I absolutely loved. First of all, the design of Wormy Boy Steven, which is very much more a Godzilla-style design than a Wormy-style design, was very cool. I think I preferred the darker pink coloration that we got in the intro. Like, I know the intro's dark, but still, it looked like he was darker than he ended up being, just based on the intro, right? I like that darker pink better than the lighter pink they ended up going with, but the design's very cool. And there are moments that I absolutely adore. I already mentioned the Connie moments. I mentioned how great it was to hear all the other characters acknowledge how much they have hurt Steven. I like when Greg stood his ground and didn't run away. I like when Lapis showed up to restrain him and we got the repeat of the ice chains. That was very cool. I absolutely adored that shot we got of Peridot riding on Bismuth's back as she levitated Bismuth through the air via her ferrokinesis. That was just very adorable. I liked that a lot. And I absolutely loved when Steven finally broke down and just cried it out. It was so cathartic. And Zach, by God, he's such a talented guy. Like, there are episodes of animated shows where I get so lost in the performance that I forget that I'm listening to voice actors voicing animated characters for a little while. But they're rare, and this was one of them. It was that good. But the episode still ended up feeling hollow. And at least part of that comes from the fact that I feel like, as I mentioned before, Steven Universe Future, it feels like an incomplete show. I think I've said this before in a past video. If I haven't, I posted it on a social media at some point or something. But Steven Universe Future feels like half of Steven Universe. Like, remember when the show used to tie in the character development with vaguely metaphorical iterations of what the characters were going through, set within the framework of a fantastical world with unfolding lore? Yeah, Future doesn't do that. It's very focused, very laser focused on just the down-to-earth interpersonal relationships. Like, yes, this and this are technically literally that, but Pink Steven is just a very colorful representation of Steven's outbursts, and Monster Steven is just a literal visual manifestation of his breakdown. There's no lore there. There's no metaphor there. So it doesn't feel distinguishably any different than if he was just having outbursts and if he had just had a breakdown. This and this seem to suggest that there would be some lore tied in to all of Steven's issues, and there just wasn't. And that's fine. This is technically a new show. It didn't have to be like the old show. But that was what made Steven Universe great. The fact that it could tie the interpersonal stuff into a larger, unfolding, lore-driven narrative, and do it so well. Future just didn't. And when it tried to, nothing ever came of it. Remember Bluebird? Because I literally didn't, until someone in my Tumblr asks, in an ask that I haven't replied to yet, reminded me that Bluebird existed. And that it seemed to be, that her existence seemed to be setting up for some lore story about gems who weren't acclimating well to the new status quo and wanted to get revenge on Steven for setting it in motion, and that just never happened. So Bluebird, an episode that I think was already pretty bad to begin with, ends up being absolutely pointless. It contributes nothing to the narrative of the show at all. Steven feels inconsistent with himself in the episode, and the only thing that you might even be able to argue it sets up for later is Greg standing his ground better against Gems. But if he had just stood his ground there at the end against Godzilla Steven, if he hadn't gotten that little bit of pre-Godzilla Steven practice from standing up to Bluebird, I still would have bought it. That's his son. I am perfectly willing to buy that Greg would stand his ground if it meant helping his son. In a genuinely life and death situation, just maybe not in getting him to the doctor. I'm going to drop it. I'm done. I'm not going to mention Greg not taking Steven to the doctor again, I promise. And I don't want to speculate, right? Because that's very rude to the crew. But it almost feels like they had an entire other half of a show planned out at one point, and then had to scrap it to focus on the stuff that got them to the finale that they wanted. Because, and I know, again, this is probably going to be controversial of me to say, because there's a lot of people in the fandom right now telling fans to just drop it when it comes to wondering about all the lore stuff that wasn't wrapped up by the time the original show ended. But there was stuff that wasn't wrapped up by the time the original show ended. And based on the crew's history of writing fantastic lore-driven stories, the reasonable assumption to make was that stuff would be tied up through the lore revealed throughout Steven Universe Future. And it just wasn't. We never learned where Gems came from. We never learned what was in the chest. And sure, maybe there was never supposed to be anything of interest in the chest, but then just tell us that. That's something that fans have been wondering about for years. You can spare an offhanded line to tell us that we shouldn't have been worrying about it. But they don't bother. And it makes me genuinely wonder if there was supposed to be more to this show that just didn't happen. And I want to know why. I want to know if they were hamstringed into a tighter schedule by Cartoon Network, or if it was the crew that decided to scrap part of the show, or if there wasn't another part of the show at all. Because if it was just Cartoon Network being Cartoon Network again, fine. The ending of the show was still really freaking good. I want to stress that point again. It was still really freaking good. I'm not, mad at the crew or anything, but if this really was the story that they intended to tell, in the exact shape that they intended to tell it, then I think they made several missteps. Missteps that, even considering that the writing staff is considerably different than it used to be, I wouldn't expect them to make. Guys, the finale of Steven Universe was still great. I wouldn't be thinking this much about it, worrying this much about it, if it wasn't great. Seriously, think back to how many times I've mentioned the finale to Star vs. the Forces of Evil on my channel since it happened. It was literally just the one time in my review of it. That's literally it. Because it was terrible, and I no longer care about it because of how terrible it was. I only really dig into stuff like this when I still enjoyed it enough to care, but feel like it didn't live up to its potential. And at the end of the day, that's what I feel about this finale. It was still fantastic. I still loved it. I still cried. I'm still super happy for these characters, and the fact that they ended up in such positive places. But I still feel like this could have been so much more than it was. And now, as it becomes less and less likely that we are going to get any sort of follow-up to this story anytime soon, the more I think about it, the more that bums me out. And I get it. I get what some fans are saying, that telling us the backstory of Rhodonite's components, for example, or having fluorite defuse on screen, those would have been very fan servicey kinds of things. A lot of the stuff that fans were asking for the crew to do were very fan servicey things, and we shouldn't get hung up on the fact that they didn't happen. These characters, for better or for worse, are written very much like real people. I think we need to respect that sometimes it's just not appropriate to force a character into a specific shape for nothing but the audience's benefit. But stuff like long-standing lore questions, I think should have been answered, if it was possible to answer them in the first place. Like, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, please help me, because I cannot believe I'm about to say this, but where was Ronaldo through all this? Like, he's gotten some cameos here and there, but where was our Ronaldo episode, where they at least hinted at the lore reveals that we hadn't gotten, at what they might be, so that we could try to piece together from those hints what the right answers might actually be. We didn't even get something like that. And that's the kind of thing that the crew used to delight in. And again, this could just all be the result of the fact that a lot of the old writers are gone and the staff is mostly turned over. But I can't believe that Rebecca Sugar would bring writers onto the show who didn't know how to write the kind of show that her fans love. I think she cares too much about us to do that. I don't know. Again, I want to reiterate, this was a good finale. It ended on a fantastic note. And even though we all knew that Godzilla Steven was Godzilla Steven, and we all knew that everybody was going to reconcile at the end, and we all knew Steven was going to leave Beach City at the end, and we all knew he was going to be in therapy at the end, it was still very satisfying to see all that stuff happen, with the possible exception of Godzilla Steven a little bit, because again, that was kind of anticlimactic. But still, very satisfying finale. This was a good finale. It's not even just that I wanted it to be more. Because I want to be clear, I did want it to be more. That is part of this, but there's more to it than that. I genuinely feel like this could have been more and still worked just as well. I feel like it should have been more, and that if it had been, it still would have worked just as well. I loved it, but at the same time, I feel like I could have loved it so much more still. I don't know, I'm rambling at this point. Again, despite my various criticisms, these episodes were still great. I still honestly believe that everything's fine and the future are some of the best episodes of this show overall. And by God, I didn't expect a show that I care about this much. I didn't expect the ending of it to leave me feeling more hopeful than I am sad. And yet, the finale of Steven Universe managed to do that. And I just gotta say, regardless of my criticisms for this finale, regardless of my criticisms for future, regardless of my criticisms for the show overall, because I do have several, I love this show so much. By God, thank you so much for this show. Rebecca and everyone else. I wouldn't even know where to start naming everybody, honestly. If by some miracle any of you end up watching this video, thank you so much for this show. Like I've said this elsewhere, but I feel like it bears repeating, you know? I wouldn't be who I am without this show. This show came into my life at a time in my life where I was floundering. I was on the cusp of becoming who I was going to be from that point forward. And I had two directions I could go. I was teetering on the brink. I had two directions I could go. I could have doubled down and become even more of the pretty shitty person I was at the time, or I could become something better. And it was thanks to this show that I chose the latter option. It's thanks to this show that I understand myself and my identity as well as I do. I've made friends because of this show. I have a small following here on the internet because of this show. And frankly, considering the kind of place I was in when I found this show for the first time, I think it's safe to say that I might well still be here because of this show. I am so thankful that it exists that I can't even put it into words. And I'm going to miss it so much. And whether we get an actual follow-up for it or not, and regardless of what form that follow-up takes, should it happen, I will never stop believing in Steven. And while we're on the topic, thank you guys so much. Obviously, there are not as many of you who come around for these videos as there used to be, but at the end of the day, it's because of that that I'm even more thankful for those of you who have stuck around to take this amazing journey with me from not quite beginning to end, since I didn't really come into the show until a bit before Jailbreak. I don't even remember which episode was the first one I saw anymore. How weird is that? Point is, as thankful as I am for the show, I am equally thankful for you guys. Every single one of you. There is a reason why I have taken to, whenever I remember to actually post a channel update, I sign off with I love you. Because I do. I am just as thankful for all of you as I am for this show. And I hope that even without this show for me to talk about, even though I am still going to talk about it from time to time, there's still more to say, obviously, that you guys continue to stick with me because I have some pretty great stuff planned. At least I think. Going into the future. All of that said though, guys, and as per usual, I'd like to know, what did you guys think of the final 3 episodes of Steven Universe? Of the entire frickin' show. Do you agree with what I said? Do you disagree? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, or on my Twitter. I'm actually doing stuff over there sometimes now, which is very strange, but still kind of fun at the same time. Either way though, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.